They told me my world was shrinking to the size of a single room. My body had given its final notice, and this was the waiting place. But in that silence, I found a truth so vast it could fill the universe. What I learned in these 2 months is a secret about freedom you must hear before the end. Emptying cup. We believe our lives are defined by our reach, by the force of our will upon the world. For 77 years, my identity was a house I had built with my own hands. Each brick an action, an accomplishment, a decision made. I was a man who could fix a leaking tap, who could drive for hours just to see the ocean, who could choose what to eat and when to sleep. My freedom was the tangible feeling of a car key in my pocket, the satisfying weight of a bag of groceries, the simple authority of locking my own front door at night. The perimeter of my existence was as wide as I chose to make it, and then, in what felt like the span of a single breath, that perimeter collapsed into the 4 walls of this room. The door was no longer mine to lock. The choice was gone, not taken by a thief, but surrendered to the quiet, undeniable force of a body that had finally exhausted its mandate to hold me upright. The first days here were not a gentle settling. They were a raw, violent amputation of the self I knew. Imagine waking from a dream to find your limbs are no longer yours to command. This was the feeling. The ego, that part of us that clings so desperately to its own story, began to rage. It wasn't a loud outward protest. It was a silent internal firestorm that consumed all the available space within my mind. This room, so clean, so sterile, so filled with the unnervingly cheerful light of a new day, became a torture chamber. Every corner of it was a mirror reflecting back a single devastating word: diminished. My mind, a frantic narrator, immediately began to play its greatest hits of a life lived in a body that worked, a life of strength and independence. It showed me memories of lifting my children, of hiking up a mountain trail, of the simple pride in a day of hard work in the garden. These images were not comforting. They were knives twisting in the wound of the present moment. The core of this initial agony was the confrontation with pure helplessness. It is a state we spend our entire lives engineering our way out of. To need another human being to perform the most basic acts of living, to help you shift your weight in bed, to bring you a glass of water that is only a few feet away, to hand you the pills that keep you alive. This is a profound dismantling of the carefully constructed fortress of selfhood. The monkey mind, our inner commentator, fills this new vacuum with its most toxic chatter. "You are a burden," it whispers. "Look at how they have to stop their busy lives to tend to you. You are nothing but a task on their checklist." The stories it spun felt not like thoughts, but like fundamental truths, delivered with the certainty of a judge's sentence. This is a punishment. You failed to take care of yourself. This is the pathetic end you have earned. And for a time, a long time, I listened, and I believed. I would find myself watching the young nurses. I saw the effortless way they moved, the fluid grace in their stride, a physical poetry I had once taken for granted. They carried the future in their pockets, an endless expanse of choices and possibilities, while my own future seemed to be the view of the same wall, day after day. A deep, acidic bitterness would rise from my stomach, a poison of my own brewing. I was in a constant low-grade state of war with my reality. I was fighting the schedule of the meals, resenting the knock on the door, hating the cheerful tone used to ask about my bodily functions. Every interaction was filtered through this lens of resistance. I was trying to hold on to the memory of a cup that was not just full, but had been shattered into 1,000 pieces on the floor. And still, I tried to scoop water with my hands, furious that it all kept slipping through. The universe was asking me to let go of the shards, and I was just clenching my fists tighter, cutting myself on my own resistance. But a state of perpetual war is unsustainable. The body, already frail, grows even more weary from the tension, and the spirit, the essence beneath the screaming ego, eventually begins to yearn for peace. The surrender, when it came, was not a glorious epiphany. There were no white lights or angelic choirs. It arrived in the quiet desperation of complete and utter exhaustion. I was lying in bed one afternoon, my energy so low that even the act of formulating a resentful thought felt like too much work. I was watching a small, rectangular patch of sunlight as it crept millimeter by millimeter across the faded floral wallpaper. For hours, that was all I did. I watched its silent, indifferent, unstoppable journey. And a thought arose, not from the angry ego, but from a deeper, quieter place. What if you just stopped? What if I stopped fighting the fact that lunch arrives at noon? What if I stopped interpreting the nurse's assistance as proof of my failure and saw it as simply what is happening right now, as neutral as the sun on the wall? What if I let go of the war and simply allowed reality to be my reality? In that moment, a subtle shift occurred. It was not resignation. Resignation is a bitter giving up. This was an active, conscious act of letting go, a surrender. It was the decision to stop wasting my precious, finite energy on a battle I could never win. Paradoxically, in the full acceptance of my powerlessness over my circumstances, I felt the first glimmer of a new, unfamiliar kind of power. It was the power to control my inner response. We spend our lives pushing, pulling, and trying to bend the world. Here, with nothing left to push against, I was forced to discover that the only true leverage I ever had was over the landscape of my own mind. This was the first painful and absolutely necessary step, the emptying of the cup. All the bitter poison of regret, resentment, and resistance had to be poured out to make space for anything new to enter. This process was not instantaneous. It was a slow, difficult practice, a conscious choice made 100 times a day. Each time the resentment flared up, I had to notice it and gently let it go. Each time the story of poor me began to play, I had to see it as a story and not the truth. It felt like learning to use a new muscle. At first it was weak and clumsy. I would fall back into bitterness for hours at a time. But each time I returned to that choice of surrender, the muscle got a little stronger. I began to deconstruct my own identity. The label of independent man was gone. So who was I? The label of useful person was gone. So what was my purpose? This stripping away is terrifying because we believe we are our labels. We run from the question of who we are without them, filling our lives with endless noise and activity to avoid the silence where that question lives. Here, in this room, there was no noise. There was nowhere to run. The question became my roommate, my companion. And the answer didn't come in the form of a new label. The answer was in the space that was created when the old labels were finally allowed to dissolve. It was a terrifying, liberating, and utterly pristine emptiness. Finding rhythm. The second great lesson was delivered to me disguised as a cage. In the world outside, we construct our own lives, or at least we maintain the powerful illusion that we do. We eat when we want, work when we must, and relax when we can. Our days have a shape, but it is a shape we feel we have authored. Here that authorship is removed. The structure is absolute, impersonal, and governed entirely by the clock on the wall. 7 a.m. A nurse switches on the light. 8 a.m. The breakfast cart rattles down the hall. 11 a.m. pills in a small paper cup. 12 p.m. lunch. 3 p.m. a scheduled activity, often just sitting in a common room. 5 p.m. dinner, impossibly early. 9 p.m. lights are dimmed. In the beginning, this rigid rhythm felt like the most profound insult to my dignity. It was the definitive proof that my life was no longer my own. It was a metronome ticking away the seconds of my imprisonment. My mind, that freedom-loving entity, went into a state of full rebellion against this tyranny of the clock. It was a quiet, internal rebellion, but it was ferocious. I would deliberately turn away when the breakfast cart came, a futile gesture of defiance. I would harbor deep resentment for the cheerful "time for your medicine," as if the medicine itself were part of the conspiracy to control me. This resistance to structure is deeply embedded in our modern idea of freedom. We picture freedom as a vast open field with no fences, a life of pure spontaneity where we follow our every whim and desire. We think that rules and routines are for the uninspired, the uncreative. We believe that true life only happens in the gaps between our obligations. But is this true? A river that has no banks is not a powerful carving force. It is a swamp. It is a sprawling, stagnant, aimless morass of water with no direction, no energy, no purpose. It is the banks, the structure, the discipline that give the river its velocity and its power to shape the landscape. For centuries, monastic traditions have understood this secret. The Zen monk who rises at the 4 a.m. bell is not a prisoner of that bell. The bell is his liberator. It liberates him from the single most draining and useless activity of the mind, the debate. Should I get up now? The bed is so warm, maybe just 10 more minutes, but I should meditate. But I'm so tired. This internal negotiation drains vast reserves of our mental and spiritual energy before the day has even truly begun. The bell cuts through all of it. The decision has already been made. The energy that would have been squandered on that pointless debate is now conserved, available to be directed toward a higher purpose, toward an inner practice. The structure is not a cage. It is a trellis upon which the vine of the spirit can grow strong and reach for the light. I was looking at the trellis and seeing only a prison. And so, out of the same exhaustion that led to my surrender, a new experiment began. It was a simple hypothesis. What if, instead of fighting the rhythm, I actively joined it? What if, for one day, I treated the schedule not as my jailer, but as my teacher? I made a conscious choice. When the 8 a.m. bell of the breakfast cart arrived, I would not just passively receive the tray. I would treat it as a formal invitation to be present. I would sit up, wait for it, and when it came, I would devote my entire attention to the act of eating. I began to truly notice things my resisting mind had completely ignored. I noticed the swirling patterns the milk made in the warm porridge. I felt the specific weight of the spoon in my hand. I isolated the taste of the cinnamon. The meal transformed from an imposition into a ceremony, a small anchor of mindfulness in the morning. When it was time for my medication, instead of resentment, I would try to feel gratitude for the science and the care that went into it. Slowly, day by day, as I leaned into the structure, a profound shift occurred. The walls of the cage did not disappear, but my perception of them dissolved. The most surprising gift of this surrender to rhythm was the immense amount of mental space it created. By outsourcing all the small decisions of daily life, when to eat, when to wake, when to sleep, my mind was unburdened. It was freed from the constant, low-level hum of logistical planning and pointless resistance. It was like closing down dozens of unnecessary programs running in the background of a computer. Suddenly, the processor was free, and with this new freedom, it could focus on things it had been too busy to notice. The quality of the light became fascinating. The dance of dust motes in a sunbeam was a spectacle. The distant sound of children playing in a park became a symphony. The very rhythm of my own breath, something I had ignored for 77 years, became a source of profound stability and peace. The schedule that was designed to manage my body became, unintentionally, a rigorous training regimen for my soul. This discovery holds a universal lesson. We can all be the architects of our own liberating structures. A non-negotiable morning routine. Wake, stretch, meditate, with no internal debate. A set time each day for a walk without a phone. A chosen time to shut down all screens for the night. These are not fences that limit our freedom. They are the banks we build for our own river, allowing our energy to flow with purpose instead of seeping away into the swamp of distraction and indecision. True freedom, I began to see, is not the chaos of doing whatever you want, but the peace of being fully present for what you are doing. The other residents too became part of this rhythm. Their repetitive behaviors, which I once viewed with pity, I now saw with new eyes. The man who folded and refolded the same napkin was not lost in a loop. He was practicing his own form of meditation. The woman who hummed the same tune was not stuck. She was creating a sanctuary of sound. We were all a quiet orchestra, each playing our own small instrument, but held together by the steady tempo of the home's daily life. And in this shared rhythm, the isolating feeling of I began to soften into a more comforting sense of we. The structure had quieted the mind, and now it was possible to truly see. Seeing clearly. With the silencing of the constant internal war against structure, a new kind of quiet began to settle in my mind. It was not an absence of thought. The mind, like the heart, is never truly still. But the character of the thought changed. The frantic, screaming chatter of the ego subsided into a low, gentle hum, like a distant engine you can choose to listen to or ignore. In this newfound quiet, a deeper faculty awakens. It is the faculty of pure observation. It is the ability to see the world as it is, not as your personal story filters it. The third and perhaps most transformative lesson was this practice of seeing clearly, of looking at the world without the distorting lens of my own judgment, my own needs, and my own fears. The landscape had not changed. It was still one room, one hallway, one window, but now it was as if a thick layer of dust had been wiped away from my eyes. Everything was luminous. My perception of the staff underwent the most dramatic change. For weeks, I had seen them not as people, but as functions. They were the pill giver, the food bringer, the bed changer. My mind had reduced their complex humanity into a simple label that defined their utility to me. Now, in my quiet, I began to truly see them. I noticed the almost imperceptible weariness in the shoulders of the nurse who worked a double shift. I saw the genuine, unforced warmth in the eyes of the morning aide who always asked about the weather as if it were the most important news of the day. I started noticing the small, extra-human things they did that were not on any checklist. A caregiver pausing to straighten a photograph on another resident's nightstand. A nurse sharing a piece of her own chocolate with someone who was having a difficult day. These were not acts performed for recognition. They were small, quiet gestures of grace. I saw their fatigue, their patience, their moments of private frustration, and their resilient compassion. My heart, which had been so tightly shuttered by self-pity, began to crack open with a profound sense of gratitude and connection. This new side extended to my fellow residents. For weeks, I had seen them only as frightening projections of my own potential future. Each of them was a mirror showing me what I was terrified of becoming. Confused, silent, forgotten. This judgment was a defense mechanism, a way of creating distance. I am not like them, my ego insisted. Now, with the judgment silenced, I saw them as libraries. Each quiet person was a vast, sprawling collection of stories, loves, heartbreaks, and wisdom, now stored in a silent archive. There was a woman, Helen, who sat motionless by the window for most of the day. The staff said she was gone. For weeks, I believed it. She was an empty vessel. But as I began to watch her, really watch her, I saw the truth. I saw the way her eyes would minutely track the flight of a sparrow from one branch to another. I saw a ghost of a smile appear on her lips when the afternoon sun warmed her face. I saw her fingers tapping out a rhythm on the arm of her chair, a rhythm only she could hear. Helen wasn't gone. She was completely here, but her here was a rich, full, internal world. She no longer had any need to project it outwards. Her silence was not a void, it was a sanctuary. My earlier judgment of her as tragic was entirely about me. It was my fear of being unseen, my fear of silence. In seeing her clearly, I was able to see my own fear clearly and let it go. The most challenging and rewarding object of observation, however, was my own mind. It is one thing to observe the world outside. It is another entirely to turn that lens of awareness inward. To watch your own thoughts parade across the stage of your consciousness without leaping onto the stage and joining the play. This is the ultimate practice. The familiar thoughts of fear still arose. The fear of more pain, the deep primal fear of the moment of death, the fear of being an inconvenience. But my relationship to them had fundamentally changed. Before, I was completely identified with the thought. The thought "I am lonely" would arise, and immediately I was lonely. The emotion would consume me. Now I could create a tiny pocket of space. The thought "I am lonely" would arise, and the observer in me would note, "Ah, here is the thought of loneliness. This is how it feels in the chest. This is the story it tells." By acknowledging it, without either fighting it or believing it, I robbed it of its power. I saw it for what it was. A fleeting electrical pattern in the brain, a cloud passing through the vast sky of my awareness. Before, I believed I was the cloud. Now I was learning that I am the sky. This self-mastery is not about achieving a blissful state of no thought. That is a fantasy. It is about transforming your relationship with your own mental and emotional weather. You can be in a body that is failing, in a world that is chaotic, but if you can cultivate that inner space of clear, non-judgmental observation, you possess a freedom that is untouchable. The drama of the world continues, but it no longer has to be your drama. I had a profound experience of this with a young caregiver who was new and visibly nervous. He was rushing, and his hands were shaking as he tried to adjust my pillows. The old me would have instantly been consumed by a story of fear and anger. He is incompetent. He will drop me. This is unacceptable. But the observing me simply watched. I saw his fear. I saw the frantic desire to do a good job and the crushing anxiety that he was failing. I saw a young man trying his best. When he fumbled with my water glass, spilling it across the blanket, instead of a surge of irritation, a wave of pure compassion washed over me. I looked at him, met his panicked eyes, and said very gently, "It is all right. Just for a moment, let us find our breath." He froze, his shoulders slumped in relief. He took a single shaky breath. In that shared moment of quiet presence, all our labels, helpless old man, incompetent caregiver, evaporated. There were only two human beings seeing each other clearly, and this, I realized, is the cure for almost everything. It dissolves the illusion of separation. Inner freedom, the culmination of these lessons, the emptying of the cup, the surrender to rhythm, the practice of clear observation, all converge into one final liberating truth. It is the understanding of what freedom actually is. For my entire life, like almost everyone in the modern world, I was conditioned to believe that freedom is an external commodity. It was the freedom of movement, the freedom of choice, the freedom to acquire, to achieve, and to act upon the world. It was a concept measured in miles, in dollars, in options. Based on this lifelong definition, this small room in this quiet home should have represented the absolute negation of freedom, the ultimate state of imprisonment. My external liberties were gone. I could not walk to the kitchen. I could not decide to go for a drive. My world had been reduced to the space between a bed and a window. And yet it was here, in the heart of what should have been my prison, that I finally discovered the only freedom that is real and permanent, inner freedom. This freedom is utterly independent of the body's condition or the square footage of your room. It is the supreme liberty of the mind. It is the cultivated ability to choose your own inner state, to command your own inner kingdom, regardless of the chaos or constraints of the external world. Consider the experience of physical pain, a frequent visitor in a 77-year-old body. When a sharp pain would arise in my hip, the old conditioned mind would immediately leap into action. It would layer a thick, suffocating blanket of mental suffering on top of the raw physical sensation. It would scream, "This is unbearable. How long will this last? It's getting worse." This resistance, this story of terror, was the real source of suffering. The pain was just pain. The suffering was the mind's frightened reaction to it. Now, with a practiced mind, the experience is different. The pain arises. The observing self simply notes it. Ah, there is a sharp, hot sensation in the hip. It does not add the story. It does not project into the future. It stays with the raw, direct sensation of the present moment. By meeting the pain with awareness instead of fear, its power to create suffering is diminished dramatically. The pain might be the same, but the experience is one of liberty. The ultimate fear, the great shadow that stalks us all, the fear of death, also began to lose its terrifying form. In the long, quiet hours of the night, the sheer reality of my impending end was an undeniable presence. It was no longer an abstract concept for some distant future. Its breath was on my neck. Before, this would have sent me into a spiral of terror, but through the practice of observation, I began to look at this fear directly, to hold it in my awareness. What is it, really? It is a cascade of thoughts. It is a series of images in the mind of a future that does not yet exist. It is the ego, this constructed self, this bundle of memories and preferences, crying out against its own inevitable dissolution. But who is it that is afraid? And what is it that will actually die? This body which has been in a constant state of change since the moment of my birth. This personality which has shifted and evolved over decades. As I watched, I began to sense something deeper, something behind the thoughts, behind the personality, behind the body. It was the awareness itself, the silent, stable, witnessing presence. And I understood a timeless truth. That which is aware was never born and therefore can never die. It is the sky, and everything else is just weather passing through. This knowing does not erase the human sadness of leaving, but it completely dismantles the terror. It replaces it with a vast, open peace. My small room, my supposed cell, slowly transformed into my monastery, my sacred space. The window, which I had once wept at as a symbol of the world I could no longer access, became my private cinema, my teacher. It showed me the infinite and beautiful drama of the natural world, the courage of a single blade of grass pushing through a crack in the concrete, the effortless painting of the sunset on the canvas of the clouds, the lesson of impermanence in the falling of a leaf. The rigid daily schedule, my former jailer, became the comforting rhythm of a spiritual practice, a bell calling me back again and again to the present moment. Even my absolute dependence on others, which had been the source of my deepest shame, was reframed. It became a constant, humbling opportunity for connection, for receiving care with grace, and for offering silent gratitude. Everything, absolutely everything, that my old self had labeled as a curse, as a loss of freedom, had been transmuted by this internal shift in perception into a tool for the attainment of true, unshakable freedom. This is the ultimate secret, the insight I felt compelled to share. We are all living within the confines of a room. Your room might be your job, your financial situation, your role in your family, your own limiting beliefs about yourself, or your constant fear of judgment. We spend so much of our energy rattling the bars of these self-imposed cages, believing that happiness and freedom lie on the other side. But we are mistaken. The cage is not the issue. The issue is that we have mistaken ourselves for the cage. We have identified with our limitations. True, radical freedom is the experiential realization that you are not the cage. You are not your thoughts. You are not your body. You are not your circumstances. You are the vast, silent, conscious space in which all of those things are appearing. You do not have to wait for a crisis to discover this. You can begin the journey home right now by taking a single conscious breath and for just a moment noticing the quiet, aware presence that is reading these words. That is the beginning. That space is the only real refuge. It is the source of a peace that is independent of circumstance, and a freedom that no person and no situation can ever take away from you. The final truth is that I was never confined to a room. I was only confined to a way of seeing. In learning to see differently, I found a universe.